Hi, I'm Emily. I'm using a throwaway account right now because I don't want this on my main account. I'll be referring to my husband as James and my mother-in-law as Margaret. I'm 28 and have been married to James, also 28, for about 2 years. We were friends in college and reconnected at a friend's party a few years ago. We've been together for almost 4 years, including our married time. James and I love each other, and I don't regret marrying him at all. The only issue I have is with his mother. Margaret was a single mother and raised James on her own, which is commendable, but she's really arrogant and cold. From the first day, she made it clear she didn't approve of me. I believe it's because of my financial background. I didn't grow up wealthy. My parents worked hard to provide for me and my 3 sisters. My dad was a janitor, and my mom took on several odd jobs. I'm proud of my upbringing and my parents' hard work. They raised us to be good people, and we've always been proud of them. Margaret, however, is quite classist. She made a face when I told her about my parents' jobs during our first dinner together. Since then, she's made it clear I'm not welcome in her family. She didn't say anything directly, but kept her distance and even used different, less nice silverware and plates for me. I didn't mention it to James at first because I thought I might be overthinking things. But over time, it became clear that Margaret's actions were intentional. She bought me cheap birthday presents with the price tag still on, even though she could afford nice gifts. For example, she gave James an expensive watch and her assistant a trip to Bali, while I got a knockoff Prada bag worth $85. Realizing I wasn't imagining things, I should have talked to James about it back then. I didn't know how to bring up something so upsetting. I had been discriminated against before, but never by someone I hoped to have a relationship with. I actually admired Margaret before seeing this ugly side of her. I want to have my own business someday, and when James told me about his mother, I was impressed. My sisters and I are all finance majors. We went to college thanks to student loans and managed to get decent jobs. I work in marketing and advertising, but dream of building something of my own. I didn't want a bad relationship with my mother-in-law, which is why I stayed silent before James and I got married. I hoped Margaret would accept me eventually, but it didn't happen, and things became awkward. A few months after we got married, I finally told James that I didn't feel comfortable visiting his mother because she made me feel inferior. I felt it had something to do with my family's financial background and my dad's profession. James was understanding and said he'd talk to his mother to clear the air. He did, but it didn't help. Margaret denied everything and cried crocodile tears, claiming she had been nothing but warm to me. This only made me feel like she was trying to manipulate us. I told James I appreciated his efforts, but still didn't feel comfortable around her. We decided he would stay in touch with her, but I would avoid her until I felt ready to talk. He didn't cut her off, but distanced himself, and I knew she hated me for it. We met at family gatherings, but otherwise avoided each other, and that arrangement worked for a while. A few days ago, Margaret texted me around noon, inviting me to her 50th birthday party. She asked me to come a few hours early because she wanted to mend things. She admitted she'd been horrible to me in the past and wanted to make it up to me. I was thrilled and showed up early, thinking she was finally accepting me as family. However, as soon as I arrived, she told me to wait in the kitchen. Confused, I did as she asked. A little while later, she introduced me to the wait staff as her housemaid. I was shocked. This was a new low, even for her. She recorded the whole thing, laughing like it was the funniest prank. Everyone else was uncomfortable, and I was so humiliated that I started crying. I ran out of the house and drove home. I had told James I was visiting Margaret, but he was busy at work and hadn't read the text. He wasn't going to the party until it officially started. So I came back to an empty house and an empty inbox, feeling even more alone. I cried myself to sleep. When I woke up a few hours later, James was home, sitting beside me on the bed, furiously typing on his phone. When I asked why he wasn't at the party, James turned his phone towards me and showed me a video his mother had posted. It was the video she recorded, captioned as a prank that went wrong. She cut the video off right before I started crying, so it didn't look as bad, but she still posted it to humiliate me. I started crying again. James told me not to worry because he was trying to have it taken down. He assured me that he would do everything possible to make his mother regret this. She wasn't replying to his messages or picking up his calls because she was busy with the party. However, he knew she would call soon to ask why he wasn't there yet. When she did, he promised to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. About an hour after I woke up, his mother called him. I can't repeat exactly what he called her, but trust me, it was bad. He ended the call by promising to file a lawsuit against her for what she did to me. After he finished yelling at her, he apologized to me repeatedly for not doing enough about Margaret when I first told him I wasn't comfortable with her. I didn't blame him, honestly. When I first brought it up, I made it seem like it wasn't a big deal, so he didn't take it seriously. I never mentioned the other incidents that bothered me, and he's not the most attentive person. He never noticed anything on his own. I can't fault him for not cutting off his mother since he had no idea how horrible she could be. But on the day of her party, I finally told him everything. He was furious. He said I should have told him sooner, and I agreed. He never would have let it go on for so long. He apologized for not noticing how his mother was treating me. We talked it through, and then he called his lawyer to see if there was any legal action we could take against her. Unfortunately, we couldn't file a lawsuit for emotional distress since there were no physical repercussions of her actions. Even if we pursued it, we would likely waste our time. I told James we didn't need to go after her and could just cut her out of our lives, but that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to teach her a lesson. I could tell he was really angry on my behalf, and I loved him more for it, so I didn't stop him. He didn't do anything that day. But the next morning, he told me he'd contacted his mother. He gave her 3 days to issue a public apology, not just to me, but also to my family, in video form. If she refused, he would ensure all her business associates knew how she'd been treating me, which would ruin her reputation and future as a female entrepreneur. This threat was serious because it could destroy her career. We're on the 2nd day now, and I don't feel good about this. It feels close to blackmail. I expressed my concerns to James, but he dismissed them, saying it was the only way to teach Margaret a lesson and ensure she never bothered me again. I don't like this at all, letting my husband go after my mother-in-law. Update. Many of you suggested I talk to James again, so after he came back from work, I sat him down and shared my concerns. I know Margaret is the bad guy here, but I don't want to stoop to her level just to get back at her. I told him I didn't like the idea of resorting to such tactics for an apology that would be insincere. I asked him to call it off and let Margaret do whatever she wanted as long as she stayed away from us. Surprisingly, he didn't resist this time. Instead, he broke down into tears, and I had to console him for several minutes before he could tell me what was really bothering him. As many of you guessed, he was overcompensating for not taking things seriously when I first told him about Margaret. I realize a lot of this is my fault because I was desperate for her acceptance, even though she hated me. After watching a video, which has since been deleted, he saw how deep-rooted Margaret's problems were and felt really guilty. He channeled all his guilt into getting back at his mom instead of listening to me and what I wanted. But talking to me made him realize he was making the same mistake again by not taking me seriously. I'm quite submissive and struggle with asserting myself, but we discussed it and he texted Margaret, telling her there was no need for an apology because he didn't want anything to do with her anymore. I'm proud of both of us for handling this well and ensuring it's us against the problem, not us against each other. James and I care deeply for each other, which made it hard to address the biggest issues. We agreed to look into marriage counseling, as we could benefit from it. I've already started searching, and I hope to begin working on our marriage within the next week to prevent similar incidents from happening again. This has been one of the worst experiences of my life, and I don't want to feel that way ever again. I'm glad James is cutting Margaret off because I don't think I could see her again without wanting to smack the arrogance out of her. I won't do it, but I hope someone does. Update. A week has passed since the party. Margaret hasn't tried to contact us since James gave her the ultimatum and didn't even reply when he told her the apology wasn't needed anymore. We knew something was wrong since she wouldn't just let this slide. As days passed without any word from Margaret, we kind of forgot about it. However, today she finally showed up at our house with her lawyer. When I opened the door, she walked in without even glancing at me, as if I wasn't there. She started calling out for James, demanding he come to the living room. It was ridiculous because James was in our bedroom, and I was about to go get him anyway. She didn't need to take matters into her own hands. When James appeared in the living room, she told him to sit down on the couch. It was infuriating because she was acting like this was her house, ordering us around. James told her he would do whatever he wanted and didn't want to speak to her, so she needed to leave and take her lawyer with her. Margaret didn't budge and insisted he take a seat because he would want to hear what she had to say. I told James to just sit and listen because I wanted her out of the house as soon as possible. I knew we wouldn't get rid of her until she had her say, even if it meant listening to her legal threats or some other nonsense. I just wanted to get this over with, even if it meant listening to Margaret's legal threats or other nonsense. I was ready to hear her out so she could get the heck out. James took his place on the couch, and I sat beside him to show her who was boss around here. She could ignore me all she wanted, but this was our house, and she needed to know her place. Margaret still ignored me and told her lawyer to start reading the terms of a document she had prepared. Essentially, it stated that she wanted James to leave me. Otherwise, she would write him out of her will and give everything to other family members, her employees, and charity. The document included a list of properties and assets, probably to scare him into thinking about what he would lose by staying with me. James seemed unfazed. While the lawyer read through the list, he appeared bored, fiddling with the ring on my finger and not paying much attention. After the reading was complete, Margaret asked James if he had thought about what he would do. She warned that if he stayed with me, he could kiss his inheritance goodbye. Then the funniest thing happened. James stood up, walked towards his mother, and gave her a big hug. He said, "Goodbye, Mom." It was hilarious to see her face turn from triumphant to shocked, and I couldn't stop giggling. Finally, she acknowledged my existence and snapped at me, telling me to shut up and throwing a tantrum with several choice words I won't repeat here. I didn't respond and pretended I couldn't hear her, knowing that would piss her off the most. Even James didn't argue with her. As she started screaming at me, he suggested we return to our room since his mother was clearly losing it. He didn't want to stick around for more of her meltdown as it was quite embarrassing. We spoke to each other normally, ignoring her wild screaming and cursing. Both of us got up to go back to our room to further irritate her, but then she took it too far, accusing me of being a gold digger. She said she never should have approved our marriage and that I was only after James for his money because my dad was a loser who couldn't earn any himself. That was out of line. She had no idea how hard my dad has worked for us, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from us. I didn't argue, but calmly told her that my husband was rejecting her, despite all her money, so I was anything but a gold digger. I was a working woman who didn't take any money from my husband and did everything on my own. She had no idea what she was talking about. Then I told her to get out of my house before I called the police to have her escorted out. She finally left, but her visit had left a bad taste in our mouths. It was an unpleasant visit, but we cleared the air on many things. She knows not to mess with us now, so hopefully she'll leave us alone. Update 3. Hey guys, I'm back because Margaret did something really nasty and low, and I can't believe she thought she could get away with it. It's been about 2 weeks since she visited us. Since we hadn't heard from her, James and I assumed this chapter was finally closed and we could resume our normal lives. Clearly, we were wrong. About an hour ago, I got a call from my parents. Margaret had paid them a visit, and it was not good. She barged into their house and insulted them, calling them terrible parents who raised a gold-digging and conniving B-word like me. She said a lot of other things about me, but that's not even what I'm most offended about. She told my mother that if she had spent more time at home actually raising us instead of running errands and trying to earn money, we might have turned out better. Of course, she insulted my dad's profession again, saying she never should have allowed her only son to marry into a family like ours. According to her, it was no surprise that, since my dad was used to cleaning up other people's trash, his own daughters were the filthiest. My parents were almost in tears as they recounted what she had said. I just couldn't hold back my anger. Even thinking about her yelling at my parents in their house makes my blood boil. I'm at work right now, so I can't do anything about it yet, but as soon as I'm done for the day, I'm heading over to Margaret's house to give her a piece of my mind. She definitely needs to be taken down a peg. I texted James about it as soon as I heard what happened with my parents, but he's busy with work and hasn't replied yet. Honestly, I don't want him to come with me, but I informed him so he wouldn't be surprised when Margaret calls him up crying about what I said to her. Update 4. Hi, I'm currently at home. I came back from Margaret's house about 3 hours ago, and it was incredibly satisfying to let her know exactly what I thought of her. She didn't seem surprised when I showed up at her place and opened the door herself. She was smirking at me, and that's when I lost it. She didn't even have to say anything to make me mad because I was already fuming. I pushed her aside and went inside the house. I asked her if she had visited my parents and said all those horrible things to them. When she said yes, she sounded very pleased with herself, and I wanted to wipe that smirk right off her face. So I screamed at her as loudly as I could, and I swear I felt the house shake. I demanded to know how she dared to insult my parents. She was so taken aback by the sheer volume of my voice that she stepped back. It's quite funny now that I think about it because I'm generally a quiet and soft-spoken person. I even surprised myself with how loudly I was yelling. I called her a hypocrite and a sad excuse for a human being. I told her she had failed as a mother because she couldn't prioritize James's happiness over her own, which is why she was trying to break us apart. But that wasn't going to happen because James and I loved each other, something she clearly didn't understand. I went further, telling her I was glad her husband passed away when James was little, because he probably wouldn't have survived living with her. I said she was worse than whatever disease he had. That's when she started crying, but I didn't stop. I continued yelling at her for a few more minutes until I finally ran out of steam. By then, she was sobbing inconsolably, and I was quite happy about it. Seeing her break down felt satisfying because she had made me feel bad about myself and my family, and worst of all, she had insulted my parents. She deserved it. A few minutes after she started crying, I stormed out of the house and came back home. About an hour later, James came home. He told me he got off work early but didn't come home directly because he thought I would be at Margaret's house. So he headed over there, but by the time he arrived, I had already left. He found the door to his mother's house open and knew I had been there because Margaret was curled up on the couch, crying her heart out. I thought James would be mad at me for making his mother cry, especially since she rarely showed her emotions like that. But he told me he was proud of me for finally standing up for myself and not letting anyone walk over me. He hugged me and apologized for what his mother had said to my parents. James then shared that he had a short conversation with Margaret before coming home. He said it was probably one of the last times he would talk to her because we were going to have no contact with her. If she tried to mess with us again, we would file for a restraining order. When James asked Margaret about what I had said, she repeated everything, including my comments about his father, expecting him to defend her and say he was going to leave me for taking things too far. But he disappointed her by saying he wasn't offended by my words about his father, because Margaret had said much worse about my family. She had it coming. They got into another fight, with Margaret accusing him of not caring about her and always taking my side because I was pretending to be soft and innocent. But he told her that wasn't the case at all. The only reason he was on my side was because I was right. I had never gone out of my way to hurt her or make her feel inferior. It was she who used to do that to me. Even when confronted and given a chance to improve, she didn't take it. Instead, she turned it around on me and tried to gaslight me. Now, she couldn't complain. She had enough opportunities to make things right with me, but she didn't. Now that I was finally standing up for myself, she couldn't victimize herself and make me look like the villain. James walked out of his mother's house even as she screamed for him to come back and demanded that he leave me. But he told me he had made his choice and didn't care about anything else. It was sweet, and we had a cute little moment. We're still going to continue marriage counseling as it's going well, but now we know for sure that we have each other's backs forever. That's all I ever really